And here we go. Good afternoon. I'm Paige Browning, news anchor and reporter at KUOW. Thanks for joining KUOW and our partner, University of Washington Alumni Association, for our vice presidential debate preview today. This is the second of 4 debate previews that we'll be doing leading up to the election in November. Tonight's vice presidential debate is taking place at Kingsbury Hall at the University of Utah in Salt Lake City. The debate, which starts at 6 p.m., will be moderated by USA Today's Susan Page. For our virtual audience today, welcome. We would love to hear from you during this event, so please share your questions with us in the comments section below, and I'll be monitoring the questions as they come in to include in our discussion today. We'll try to get to as many as we can. It'll be a packed hour. And now I'd like to welcome our 2 guests today. Megan Ming Francis, Associate Professor of Political Science at the University of Washington. Hi, Megan. And we have Relina Joseph, Professor of Communication at the University of Washington and Director of the Center for Communication Difference and Equity. To start us off, hi to both of you. To start us off, I want to acknowledge that there's really nothing average about this election, nothing average about these debates that we're going into. Vice President Mike Pence and Democratic Vice Presidential nominee Kamala Harris will be sharing a stage separated by plexiglass because we are in a pandemic with coronavirus. They're debating days after Donald Trump was hospitalized after contracting COVID-19 and barely a week after what was deemed a disastrous presidential debate. So for you two, let's just start with, how do you expect this debate to compare with the debate that we saw last week?
I mean, I'll jump in here. I think that, I mean, as somebody who teaches American politics, been teaching American politics, I have 2 favorite times, I feel like, in terms of the kind of the electoral or like political events. One, I actually love Supreme Court confirmation hearings. Not so much in the last 4 years, but I tend to like them a lot. And then I love elections as well as debates. This is, for me, it is like my type of Super Bowl. It's like political Super Bowl, right? And it's you have 2 teams and they strategize to figure out how to win the game, and then the best team wins. Except that, I mean, I think it's really important to acknowledge that in all my years of teaching, I have never had a presidential election cycle like this one here, right? I think that a part of the craziness of this moment right now has been to desensitize us to what is normal, actually, in terms of a normal functioning political system. Like we lost normal 4 years ago, right? And so now what we are in terms of like what happened in the presidential debate and where we are now, I keep on thinking in terms of last week, right? We started off with Trump's taxes and we ended up with him in the hospital. I mean, what? And now we are here in a debate that many people don't even think that we should have, because we are like, protect Kamala at all costs. But somehow we're about to have a debate. So in terms of what to expect, I'm not sure. Right, because even as professor of politics, of American politics, I could not, and I knew going into this, it was going to be crazy. And I could not accurately predict to my students, as somebody who has studied this her whole life, what we could have expected. So I do think in terms of, though, this debate, it's not going to be like the last debate. It's going to be a little bit more sane, right? We should expect arguments on policies and 2 individuals fighting for different visions of what this country has been and could
be. Thank you for starting us off there, Megan. Yes, absolutely. And in terms of, I think that we're going to expect, I keep hearing about civility, right? And I think that we're going to have a guise of civility, but what I'm interested in is hearing what I'm anticipating, and I think we're going to be talking about this, is the racism and the sexism that is going to come out in many coded ways. I'm interested in all of the dog whistles that we have been hearing really as bullhorns. but coming out as more genteel fashion, in particular through Pence. I'm interested in seeing the ways in which Kamala will be using her cross-examination skills, but also we know that she is going to have to present a certain type of have to hold herself back in a certain way, right? As she has been really targeted, I think, in the press, in particularly types of racist and sexist manners. So I'm interested. Yes, absolutely, there is going to be a different type of civility, but we're going to also be able to read in many of the same messages, just coming about in a slightly different way, particularly from Pence.
I definitely want to hear more about this later in our discussion, particularly where race and gender could play into this and will play into this debate. I'm wondering first, what are the biggest risks for these candidates as they head to the stage tonight, or what are the biggest opportunities for either candidate?
I mean, so we could talk about political risk, but I think that as we're thinking about COVID, we're thinking about, Megan introduced it,
there's a physical risk
here. There is literally a physical risk. And I think that all week, that's what everyone has been thinking about, is that why do we have to have Kamala risking her life for this moment, for this particular type of a performance? So I think that needs to be stated, that is a very real risk right there. You know, in terms of polls and polling numbers, I'm not sure what would need to happen in order for those to shift dramatically. I'm interested to hear what Megan has to say. I think that we're going to see a particular type of a rolling out of policy in certain ways. We're going to see oppressing each other in certain ways. I don't know that is going to actually change what anyone's vote is going to be. So risks or not, I'm not sure it's gonna produce anything other than what we see here in the polling numbers. But what do you think, Megan?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest risk to me seems to be this question about should we even have had this debate, as well as there is a global health pandemic that has clearly consumed the White House. I have no idea who has prepped Pence. I have no idea who was part of his advance team. And it strikes me, right, that this is some of the kind of the dialogue that's come out around Trump and the coronavirus, that in terms of what it means to be a leader is not just to think about yourself and your family, but also those who take care of you, who provide security detail for you, right? And thinking about, it is very clear that Pence has been around all of these people, right? And also other people in his orbit actually have been too. And so what does it mean for them to fly as well as to come, right, to Salt Lake City and be around all these other people as well? In terms of, you know, for the most part, if we look at, in terms of debate history in American politics, I'm happy to have some members of the audience kind of debate me here, but I can't remember in terms of a consequential, at least in modern times, right, at least over the last 2 decades, of a consequential presidential debate that really shifted things, right? What they will both be doing, Pence as well as Harris, are going to be making arguments to lift, right, one in terms of Harris to lift Biden, and then Pence to lift Trump. And I think that there is also, in terms of a risk, an argument that they will both be making around the coronavirus, right? And so Pence is going to be making a specific argument here around that the coronavirus is not that bad, that Trump is a leader. He's going to try and he will argue and affirm that he is a leader. He's taken the precautions that he's needed to take, that he is a fighter and he will fight for you, just like he fought and beat the coronavirus. We don't know that yet, right? And Harris, on the other hand, is going to make the argument that Biden, right, that like in terms of what has happened to Trump is what happens when leaders don't take responsibility for their actions and are reckless, right? And she will make the argument that this is in terms of like the top of a symbol of what it means in terms of a reckless presidency who doesn't care about the health and the well-being of the American people, right? And so it strikes me that they will both make arguments about leadership, about the future of this country through the use in terms of this global pandemic. In terms of like, I think that on Pence's end, he's going to need to come out strong. I think that part of the reason why Trump has been caps locked tweeting, had to come back to the White House, is in part because he is somebody who loves right the public opinion. He's deeply concerned about how people view not just him, but also in terms of his surrogates. And so he is, I think, interested in this debate, knows that Pence is not him, right? And so Pence is going to need to be strong because otherwise Trump is going to feel like he needs to overcompensate for Pence's performance now, okay? In terms of Harris, I think that people are very excited about her. They're curious. We haven't heard that much from her, in part because there hasn't been as many rallies as there is outside of, COVID. So yeah, I don't think that there's that much risk to either of them. I think that there was a lot of opportunities for them both to make their case, though.
Yeah, and what an interesting point you made about the fact that we imagine both Pence and Kamala Harris will bring up the president's COVID diagnosis with differing arguments for why it matters in America. And I just want to have a reminder to our audience, if you have questions for our guests about the vice presidential debate coming up at 6 o'clock, if you're curious about what to watch for, you can share your comments or questions in the comments section. And at that note, we've got a question. Well, Relina, actually, if you have a thought, please share it. And then we've got a question.
I was just going to follow up on that point that Megan was saying right there, and just thinking about something else that I think that we might see Kamala doing, which is the fact that we see Pence, but he's very much a ghostly figure, right? He's barely around. And of course, that was a very intentional choice by Trump. However, he is actually in charge of the coronavirus task force. And I think that she is going to very smartly point that out. I think it's also going to be a way to link Biden-Harris to science and the ways in which the current administration has really flouted science. And I wonder if that's going to then be partnered with any kind of discussion of the environment, for example. All of the tragedies that are happening continue to happen. The wildfires in the West, our hurricanes. We have so many hurricanes that we can't even use the alphabet system right now, right? We have Hurricane Delta that's brewing in the Caribbean right now. And to use, their potential administration, the Biden-Harris administration's belief in science and how science can be used in thoughtful ways to attack climate change, in the same ways as it can be used to actually deal with the coronavirus, and the ways in which the neglect has produced over 200,000 deaths and this worldwide chaos that we're seeing here and that we're experiencing all over our country. So I'm wondering about the ways in which we're going to see the human toll, environmental toll, and the ways in which these things might be connected by Harris. I hope she does that.
Thank you for bringing up science. We'll definitely get to some conversations about science and climate change in a little bit. A question from a listener, Travis on YouTube. Travis says, what about the double standard where male politicians can yell and scream, but Senator Harris utilizes her cross-examination skills and opponents immediately tag her as a nasty woman?
Yeah.
The pause says it all.
Right. Yes. And we're nodding along. Yes, absolutely. That's very true. And of course, Harris is not just any woman. She is a Black and Indian woman. And we know that, I think it was some analysis from Time's Up early that showed that she has been painted in highly stereotypical ways, along the lines of racialized and gendered tropes, including the angry Black woman trope, which really delimits the way in which she can express herself, that she has to really quiet down, she has to contain herself, despite the fact that she is a very talented prosecutor. She can't actually let that shine in the way that she should be able to, because of the fear of the way in which that will be read by potential voters and interpreted by media as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think
Yeah,
that
Megan?
like on this point here in terms of it's not just right, Kamala. This happens in all of the different spheres of our lives, right? Whether it's in the academy, whether it is in terms of business, but because this kind of this double standard in which women of color live, especially Black women live, and there's been a lot more. I feel like kind of spotlight on that in this moment in terms of part of the kind of the protests in the spring and summer of this year have been about the ways that systemic racism work. And also some of us have called for a deeper analysis in terms of in thinking about intersectionality, which of course we can get to and talk more about much later on. But like in terms of the way that I think Professor Joseph here is in terms of just like really great in thinking about communication and the ways that especially Black women are read by the media. But this is a very real aspect that we should pay attention to, that it's not just voters, right? But it's also the way that media reports on, the way that they tweet out, and the way that they erase Black women all the time in terms of their accomplishments and what they do. And there's a way, a part of it, part of this isn't just the media, right? Part of this is much deeper, is entrenched in American history, and it's the way that it's the way that many people are raised. It's part of the way that many people are educated, and so they view oftentimes women, Black women in particular, through a different frame and through a different lens, right? And so it's not just we see this obviously with Harris this round, but obviously 4 years ago, right? We know, of course, in terms of so much of the rhetoric around Hillary Clinton was so gendered, it was deeply sexist. And the media was like, are we sexist? We're not sure, right? And people were like, no, you guys are, just even the way that you guys are reporting on Trump walking around in terms of her and around circles in the debate. And so I think that, Harris is somebody who, she is a smooth operator, right? She's always understood this. It's not all of a sudden like, oh, we have sexism and racism right now, right? That I think that part also of, I think the justified rage, especially, I'm going to change this a little bit. It's part of the justified rage in Black communities to her in response to her prosecutor background. Was sometimes I think about the ways in terms of that women and people of color in this country, what it takes for them to be seen through kind of the broader majority group as legitimate politicians, as people legitimate to be running, let's say, for public office, right? And so I think that these issues around racism and sexism are ones that Kamala Harris, has navigated, has thought about deeply, has course corrected even over time. And that isn't in terms of, and at the same time for me saying that like, don't you worry, she's still gonna kill it out here, is still not enough, right? Because that's still me saying that she has individually like navigated and maneuvered through this society's deeply structural racism and sexism, right? Yeah. That I do think that it's always like, that question is always an important question, because it's not just that, like, it's not just enough, right, that Obama became president and succeeded. It's not just enough that Kamala Harris did all these things and succeeded. We should always pay attention to the ways our structures, media, but also our institutions, do not let Black people, do not let women exercise and come and like show up as their full selves, right?
You know, and let me ask a question about that. It reminds me of some analysis I saw after Kamala Harris was chosen as the vice presidential nominee that showed that close to 25% of coverage about her included sexist or racist stereotyping in the coverage. And I'm kind of wondering if we can flip Travis's question upside down and ask, how should viewers or how should media be watching this debate so that we are not watching it and repeating what happened through a sexist or racist lens?
I think that the way in which we live racism and sexism for the most part in the 21st century is through a lot of coded means, right? And particularly folks like Kamala Harris on this stage. And I think that so as we're looking at the performances tonight, we're going to have to think about the ways in which she is given space or not given space to speak. I think that we're going to have to think about the ways in which I don't think that Pence is going to cut her off. And as Megan said, as we remember in that just horrific performance from that Hillary Clinton experienced in the debate with Trump, where he was lumbering and following her around. It's not going to be that type of a physical threat, but I wonder what types of invalidations are going to happen. We know that Pence is also a smooth operator, right? He has this background as this conservative talk show host. I think that he's going to be very comfortable spinning out and doubling down on his boss's lies. And so the ways in which she can then actually suss out the truth, but be heard in such a way without seeming, because I think that the media, the coverage that you're talking about, Paige, without seeming shrill, right? Because we heard that coverage, without seeming emasculating, without seeming as though she is somehow beating up on him or bullying him, that she's really getting to the heart of the argument, I think is going to be key for us. That we have to hear her argumentation as argumentation and take out all of those lenses, those racist and sexist lenses, which are the ways in which Black women are often read.
This is reminding me of slightly unrelated, but of something I read about President Trump today, that one reason he wanted to beat COVID was to seem manly, that gendered viewpoint, we can't get away from it at all in this election from any angle. Just a reminder to listeners that if you have questions, comments, something that you want to know what you should be watching for in the debate, you can give us a comment and I will roll them into our discussion today. One of you mentioned earlier that in this discussion, we might actually hear some more about policy than we did in the event last week between the two presidential candidates. So how about a policy question? We don't know exactly what the moderator tonight will be asking, but I imagine the economy will come up. This week, President Trump said that he would not make any deals on a new coronavirus relief package, a new coronavirus stimulus plan until after the election. We saw him partially start to walk that back today. But we know that the Biden and Harris campaign says day one, if they're elected, they will launch a new plan. What do you want to hear about these plans tonight?
All right, I'll jump in here. I mean, I think that we'll likely hear a lot more about policy, and a lot more comes from almost zero, right? From the previous debate, because there was so little substance.
You can only go up.
Yes, right. So it's hopefully something will come out. In terms of a type of kind of stimulus and or relief package, that today was very interesting. Yesterday, it was Trump basically stated right through tweet that there would be no more discussion on this, no movement until after the election. And then this morning, he blames it on Nancy Pelosi, right? Nancy's like, what you're not going to do is put this on me, because we all saw the tweets. And Biden and Kamala have been very clear from day one. Like day one, they're going to pass and be very much interested in putting together a relief package for the American people. I guess for me, I'm curious, right, especially around disbursement for individual families, for individuals, as well as for small businesses. Like, it's clear, right, that in terms of things are not getting that much better for nonprofits and for small businesses in particular, the world is not getting better. There is no vaccine. COVID is ongoing. People are suffering. People are home insecure. People are food insecure, right? So I think that for me, it's what is the plan? What are you going to do? It is also clear that part of what has come out in terms of the initial disbursement of relief, especially for businesses, is that a lot of it went to big businesses and academic institutions. And I think that one of the things that came out that I would really be curious to hear about how a next Trump administration, God help us all, or a future, knock on wood, Biden administration might approach it, is about in terms of wanting to think about the racial disparities in relief disbursement, right? So we know that companies with relationships to banking institutions, right, got much more relief than others did, as well as got relief much faster. We also, if we know a tiny bit, right, about the 2008 recession, as well as in terms of the way that many big banks were in terms of provided predatory loans to people of color and to families of color, we understand that there's a lot of tension in that relationship, right? So I'd be very curious to hear, like, if there is, and hopefully there will be, another round of relief, what are we going to do to shore up the deep racial disparities? And so we don't have what we had after the so-called recovery and like after the 2008 recession, which was a very much of a race-based recovery, right? How do we make sure, right, that in terms of the problems that we have, the deep racial disparities do not even grow even more than they have before? And so I'd be curious about that.
Yeah.
I love that. But Megan, do you think that she can touch that? So and Harris has come out and said that she supports reparations, right? And in a variety of different ways, and we can think creatively about the ways in which reparations look. And so we're talking about this can be coded as reparations in a way. The ways in which we see if any type of racial justice, any coding for racial justice is brought up, how the current administration's McCarthy-like tendencies come out, feels like it would be impossible for her to bring up this moment. So what I'm referring to, of course, is just 2 weeks ago Tuesday, this presidential edict or whatever it was that came out and said that no one that receives federal funding should teach critical race theory, which of course we teach, right? Or should participate in any type of or provide any type of trainings that deal with things such as white privilege. So for her to talk about policies that are indeed engaging in these particular concepts, and they're talking about righting racial wrongs, feels like this would be, setting some kindling and gasoline and a match on this moment right here.
No, I mean,
go ahead. I can't in terms of,
right.
I can't imagine. I just can't imagine it right now.
And this is the part in terms of when I talk to my students, right, about national politics, especially national elections, and why they always move towards like median issues, right? Why you don't have a lot of the more controversial issues like often being talked about in national elections. It's because of this, right? That like we assume that Biden and Harris are going to do that, but you're saying here in terms of what's the benefit gain here in terms of the debate. I think that there's a way here still, and maybe dropping some little crumbs around that, but speaking obviously in much more race neutral terms about it, because it is clear that part of the voting bloc that Trump has been trying to cleave off of Biden, right? And so many of these swing states are poor voters, right? And I'm not going to say poor white working class voters because I don't believe that, right? When I think about the suburbs, when I think about rural areas, what we know in terms of statistics is that those areas are actually becoming a lot more integrated, right? The most growing, I think, in terms of population in rural areas is actually Latinx people's population.
Yeah. Yes.
I just want to be very clear about that. But I think that there's a way to talk about, because people right now want to know what you're going to get from us. Yeah. Many people think about politics as a transactional relationship. You expect me to stand in line for 3 hours? Okay. What you going to do for me? And so I think that there is room to say, listen, he straight up said yesterday that he wasn't going to do anything for you. He is holding your vote hostage. We wouldn't do that. We care about you. Because that's also the other thing. And the last thing I'll say on this is that people have not felt cared for, right? And that he would actually, no mask, everything can go back to normal, very little relief. People just, especially whether it's farmers and or airline workers and or frontline workers, people just don't feel that the administration, that this government cares about them. So I do think that there is room to make a larger so-called race neutral argument about that.
And I mean, and so this is the interesting. I'm sorry, Paige.
Please go ahead.
But this is part of the interesting thing to me is that I think that Barack was really good at doing both, at having a race neutral argument, but still sprinkling in those moments that those of us that were reading for race could still read for, right? There was still a wink and a nod there. And he did it rhetorically throughout a number of his different speeches. I'm wondering if we're going to see that from Kamala. Is she going to have those moments here? I think we've been waiting, and she has not had this national stage in this particular format yet, right? But this is the question: are we going to see this moment coming out? Because I think that there is a way to do this, and we have a model, with our 44th president.
Yeah, but I'd like to see more substantive policy than under the Obama administration, right, for people of color, for Black people in particular, because he talk a good little game. But when you look at what's what, right? Come on now. When you look at what is what, right? This is consistently, Black people did not do that well under the Obama administration. Wealthy Black people did, middle class Black people did. But like poor Black people, and that's not just poor Black people, right? It's like in terms of whether it is around Muslim and Arab populations and or Latinx, the deporter in chief is what some of my students have called him, right? Deportations went up, drone warfare went up from Bush. All right. So I care also about what they say, but I also care very deeply about what they do. Now, I don't know, because we know that Biden is, Biden and Trump. I mean, not Biden and Trump, Biden and Obama. Yeah, so I don't know, but I know that this is what we have.
But this is a rhetorical moment. This is not, so that's what I'm saying. This is not a policy moment. This is a rhetorical moment. And this is the time to catch people with your rhetoric. So I hear you, and to maybe dangle a little bit of what might be attractive policy. But I'm not believing any policy that is rolled out in a VP debate, right? I mean, and this is what and Barack was not rolling out policy. He was rolling out his beautiful rhetoric to catch us, right? He caught us. You were caught, Megan. We were all caught.
Listen here. I mean, what you said, I know, Paige, we're gonna get to you. Paige's like, wait a minute. This is the last thing I'll say. But
Paige, we see you.
This is so right, because what you are talking about is like the opportunity, especially in a debate, to paint a picture, right? To paint a picture of a world that is inclusive of people and that meets people where they are, right? And that in terms of, because you don't get no policy. I like policy. That's what I care about, right? What are you doing? But you're saying, Megan, the pushback here is that part of the debate is to make it clear that somebody is fighting for you, right? And to emerge as the victor, as the person who hears the voters on the other end of the TV screen or computer screen and will fight for them. So yes, I'm with you now. Okay.
And I'm going to have to stand in line if I'm in Georgia for 7 hours to cast my vote, right? I better have some real feeling in my heart in order to do that. So give me some real feeling, and maybe that might come about through somebody might be really hooked by policy, but it might be really about some soaring rhetoric that gets them. So whatever's going to get them, I want them there.
Yeah, this talk of rhetoric is interesting, particularly when it comes to this debate, because we know that there is rhetoric that the Trump and Pence campaign use including using the term law and order, which is very widely used by their supporters and themselves. And a law and order platform is a term that dates back to slavery and Jim Crow. And this is rhetoric that they are using. But what about Kamala Harris or Joe Biden bringing up rhetoric, if you will, around racial justice, about proposals to ban chokeholds, at a minimum, to ban no-knock warrants? Are these things that she can't touch? What do you think?
You wanna touch this? You wanna start us off here, Megan? I mean, I think, like, in terms of this history, this is what we're talking about, the bullhorn. This is what I was talking about. To me, this does not feel like a dog whistle. This feels like a bullhorn. In the same way in which the call out to the Proud Boys in the last debate felt like a bullhorn. The call for law and order, for protesters to be fire hosed. I mean, this is really what that callback is about at this moment, and any type of discussion of race, any type of discussion of protest, any type of discussion about racial disparities, it's going to bring us to this moment of divide in our country. And how can we think about, I mean, for me, what I'm interested in is I'm interested in when people actually come together in dialogue, and I can't imagine there being a moment of actual legitimate dialogue around questions of police brutality, around questions of violence against Black folks in this moment. So thinking about how Harris can actually engage in a conversation about law enforcement that's then conjoined with a conversation that has to do with equity is a hard thing for me to imagine. How do those two things happen, Megan? How do you think how is she going to bring these things together?
Yeah, I mean, I just have to go on record, right, and say that, like, I couldn't even help, if somebody was just listening to this, as Paige was asking this question, I couldn't even help making faces to the continual, right, proclamations about law and order, because I'm like, this is the most lawless, lack of order administration. People are always like, oh, Professor Francis, what administration is the Trump administration most similar to? And I'm like, as somebody who has spent a long time, for example, on on Harding's administration, which is considered a corrupt administration, somebody who was a white supremacist and a deep segregationist, such as Woodrow Wilson, those are the two that I focus on a lot. People are like, what do you think? And I'm like, oh no. This stands apart. This is so, like, the idea to me that this administration tries to, like, maintain hold on this mantle of law and order just always just strikes me as beyond ludicrous, right? And so it's clear Professor Joseph was talking about, this is a bullhorn, right? It's like not even a dog whistle. It is a bullhorn, right? To those in terms of who understand the history around Nixon's campaign, around crime, and about law and order being a backlash to gains that people of color have made in this country, then we understand law and order as that. But we really, the idea that there's any type of law and order as part of that is preposterous. Right? So, let me just say that. But I do think that in terms of, I think that for some people don't fully understand that. So I do think this is actually where Harris, there's actually room for her to move, in the sense that, like, even if we take the four of them, right? If we take Biden, Trump, Harris, and Pence, she's the one with the most expertise. She actually put away law. Like, that's actually her record that actually a lot of people have problems with, right? So she actually is on a moral high ground. If you actually do care about a type of law and order, she actually got the record for you. So I wonder here, if she's going to have that question. She's kind of, especially in terms of, right, the Democrat primary, kind of like moved away from that history a little bit. But I wonder actually in this debate if she is going to move in this and own this, right? And say, and like, this is what I've done. This is my history. I'm also, this is the last thing I'll say on this question here. I was so struck by, and I've been talking about this a bit. I was so struck by Chris Wallace's question from Fox News about how we might reimagine the police. What? It's like, that is not the language that we think, a question that is normally delivered to presidential candidates, and especially coming from somebody who works at Fox News. And I wonder in that question, if a similar question is posed in this vice presidential debate, if there's an opportunity to get outside of these these boundaries, these constraints, right? One of the things that I hated from the debate, when that law and order question came to Biden, he's like, yes, I believe. When Trump kind of tricked him into say that you don't believe in law and order, and he's like, no, I believe in a type of law and order. Resist that frame, right? Live outside of that frame. Chris Wallace basically threw you the opportunity. Let's talk about in terms of how might we reimagine what policing is. And I think that there's a lot of opportunity for that conversation to happen. And we've seen people who didn't even want to think about that, be open to that conversation this spring and summer. So
I want to get to a question from a listener on this topic. Just briefly, Amy in our YouTube audience says, what should we listen for if we seek progress in addressing racial justice? And she also says, do you think there will be talk towards solutions and away from those inciting violence? But her question, briefly, what should we be looking for if we're seeking progress there?
I mean, I think that Megan was speaking to this right just a second ago, that the question about the restructuring of our police state is a way that we can begin to have questions around racial justice. I think that having really creative solutions around other forms of bailouts and how we might think about disproportionality and historically underrepresented folks, and the ways in which African Americans have been from FHA loans have been de-invested in, and through all of our recessions. And could this be a moment of reinvesting in Black communities? I think these are all really creative ways for us to think about racial justice in this moment. Again, and maybe we're going to be surprised, and she will be able to take that moment that Megan was saying that Biden kind of biffed, right? If there are creative questions that are coming, and that she'll be able to really kind of take them and run with them. I think Megan also pointed out something really interesting, that whereas in the past it really has played to be as centrist as possible, that's not where she's gone. Right? She's been trying to really work on saying, I've learned, I've changed, and trying to say that I'm moving much more progressive, I'm moving much further left. And so maybe we're going to see moments of that today. I think that perhaps they're understanding that the centrist voters are not going to be moving their way.
I'm going to pivot to another viewer question from Sarah on YouTube. Sarah says, what are a few topics that each candidate will tackle that will attempt to sway voters who are on the fence? Any insight or any ideas there? How are they going to attempt to sway those few undecided?
Who is on the fence right now? I mean, are they for this? I'm asking you as a political scientist, Dr. Francis. Can you tell me, who is?
Maybe that's a better question. Right, yeah, and it might not be Washington State. Yeah.
I mean, it's not really Washington State, right? We're not a swing state. I think in terms of.
I read about some people. I'm like, who are these people? Tell me. Okay, I'll be quiet.
I mean, no. This is always the important question, right?
Right.
How are people 1 month before, 1 week before an election undecided? My students are always like, who are these median voters? Who are these swing voters? Show us them, right?
I am one of your students right now.
And by the time you get to the debate, by the time we're having this debate, most people are decided.
Most people are decided. It tends to be
a month ago.
Yeah, but I think even the swing voter has changed over the last 4 years. I think the profile, at least a lot of the literature in political science in terms of who is the swing voter has shifted a lot. A lot of it seems to be around in terms of the unemployment, jobs, wages. So I think that actually is kind of like an issue. It often also is in terms of what can actually shift voters. For those who are not like, I can tell like us three and likely many of the listeners, deeply engaged and interested in the political process, right? But we all got family and we all got friends who don't really engage in the political process that much, right? Where you have to like text them or call them and be like, did you register to vote? What do you, let me call some, but let's get you registered to vote, right? Like they're just like, things just like happen, right? So I think that in terms of who are these swing voters, oftentimes these are people who are disengaged from the voting process, people who have felt let down by the political process, who are trying to figure out what are they gonna get out, people who don't like both candidates, right? Who this is something that I've actually heard a bit over the last month. They're both the same. They both equally bad, Megan. Well, no, there's a lot of differences, right? But this is something that you hear. And so I think that for those, you have to give them something. And so a lot of people, especially right now, a lot of so-called moderate or so-called mainstream Republican voters are one issue voters. Some people are voting strictly, right, on the stock market. Some people are strictly on the transformation in the federal judiciary. That is all they care about. All they care about is, right? Other people, all they care about is progressive, like a set of progressive politics and or let's say policing, right? And or all they care about is to get Trump out. So in terms of, that's a really, to this listener, that's a really tough question about what they can say. And this is like what they're like obviously brainstorming about right now, is like what they can say to move some of these undecided voters into the, for Harris, into the vote for Biden camp. It's likely gonna be, at least in my opinion right now, it's likely gonna be those who are perhaps unemployed, who wanna know what is going on. This country, right? Democracy is at a low point, right? Authoritarianism is like coming for democracy, right? People don't have jobs. People are out of work. How many people have been evicted from their homes? And so I think that people are trying to figure out what they can offer, because we know, right? We know what Trump.
You know, I should note we've got only about 11 minutes left, and we're going to cover some good ground before then. But I have a question about one particular topic, which is climate change. As we well know, the Pence campaign and the Kamala Harris campaign have very different views and policies and proposals surrounding climate change and the climate crisis. But increasing numbers of voters are demanding a substantive plan, some saying they haven't seen it from both, what they want to see. What are we going to hear tonight when it comes to climate change, if it comes up at all?
I mean, I could see it come up in the context of coronavirus, right? That the Trump administration is clearly an administration that doesn't believe in science. Like that's the way. I'm not sure if there is going to be a conversation around the climate, around climate change. It's hard to think that that is an opportunity for either campaign, I think, right now. But there is a sense, right, about like, there is something called science, and we believe what scientists say, except the Trump administration does not, right? And like you've had many scientists who work for different federal agencies resign with statements that say explicitly that this administration does not believe in science. This administration consistently undermined scientists, right? Whether it is in terms of how to actually tackle the coronavirus, the appropriate precautions that are necessary, as well as what we should do around climate change. So I think that that is, my sense is that she is going to hammer in on the coronavirus, the lack of responsibility, the recklessness of the administration, and what this means moving forwards, not just in terms of it's no longer, right, forests and whales and fish and bears, right, that are in danger. It is the American people that are in danger because there's a lack of belief in science. So I can see her going kind of focused on that. The last thing I will say is that, right, climate change is also always a racial justice issue. And there's hopefully kind of a ways that maybe she can touch on that as well. I think oftentimes when we talk about climate change, like it's just climate change, right? But again, especially being Washington State, thinking about like who are the OG climate defenders, and that's going to be Indigenous peoples here.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And I'm thinking just strategically in terms of climate change. I can imagine the wildfires, particularly affecting the West, are not going to be a particularly big issue because we've seen that the current administration is clearly not concerned with the West. However, the issue of the hurricanes, I think, and we have to talk about how the hurricanes are absolutely connected to climate change, and they're talking about Florida, they're talking about Texas. These are two key states here. I can see her connecting in the ways in which Dr. Francis has talked about here, and perhaps for those voters who are being flooded out of their homes, who are losing their homes, who are having to move into shelters because of the hurricanes at this moment, that this will be a compelling issue for them.
Yeah, well, I'm really eager to hear what comes up on climate change and who brings it up. Another specific question related to science, and in this case, health. This is from Jessica on Facebook. They say, going into the debate, what would you expect a follow-up from Pence about the recent video message from Trump about use of experimental drugs that he received at Walter Reed? As the person in charge of the task force, Pence, do you think that this is something Pence will really have more information on? Trump using experimental drugs?
I mean, I think that he's going to have to be very cautious about rolling any information about that out, because we know that the drugs that the current president was able to have access to, very few Americans would be able to have. So and Harris is going to take him down like that in terms of access and access to, and we're going to hear there about access to healthcare and a number of other things. I think that he is going to try and sail much higher and talk more about things like sealing the borders, and that has been a very troubling issue with Pence, and the way in which his really kind of dastardly immigration intentions came about with coronavirus and the sealing of the borders there. So I can see that happening more, and talking kind of more about grand leadership and leadership plans. But I think that the more that he gets into the weeds and how the administration has dealt with coronavirus, the more that Harris is really going to just take him apart there.
How about one more question from a listener, and then we'll get quickly to a question about the gubernatorial debate, which is also tonight. From Zeki on YouTube, what are the political ramifications of pulling out of a debate? Too late for today, but what about next week? There was talk even after last week about, is there going to be a vice presidential debate? Even my colleagues are asking, is this going to happen? What are the ramifications of pulling out, just briefly?
This question here is if Joe pulls out.
I guess it could go either, but I think that would be the more likely.
I mean, it felt like for me until 2016 that presidential debates mattered. Like, not every single one, but they mattered. And it's actually, to me, felt increasingly less like they matter. In part because, I mean, this is in part because of deep polarization. That's connected to Trump, but that's not just all of Trump, but like the increasing polarization in the American electorate has led, in terms of kind of this middle ground, like in terms of where people are on these issues, there's so much, it's clear where people actually are in terms of candidates, right? So I'm not actually sure. Like, I don't think we needed the first debate. And if it is the case, if we believe science, right, then we know he's going to be still, he could still pass it to people who are cleaning the space, who the moderator is, to Biden himself, to the few audience members that are actually there.
Right.
Despite how many times he can caps lock tweet us online, he is still contagious. That is what science says, right? No matter how much of him trying to tell us that he isn't and isn't great, science tells us, right, that he still is. So I think that there is, in my opinion, a way that the Biden campaign can spin this actually to win political points, that they are concerned about the health and the safety of the individuals at the debate. And because Trump lacks the type of leadership skills necessary to take care of people who are around him, Joe Biden will have to sacrifice his second debate performance to make sure that everybody is safe and that he wishes Trump well in terms of his recovery, right? So I actually think that because what does he gain, right, Paige? What does he gain to argue? Like, first off, we have Trump. You don't even abide by the rules to the point in which the debate commission is like, we have to pass new rules just for him. There's nothing to be gained, right? Not in my opinion. To me, use that time that you would have done debate prep to go campaign in battleground states, right? Yeah.
I absolutely agree. And yet we know that he comes out and says this, and then all of the nasty Sleepy Joe and I'm the real man and I can do this even though I had COVID, right? All of that comes out. And does that have some purchase for those undecided voters? I'm not sure at this point, but I continue to be surprised by how low the bar goes in this campaign and this administration.
I think we've got time for one last question on the governor's debate. Let's just do rapid fire here. Governor's debates tonight between Governor Jay Inslee and Republican challenger Lauren Culp. What are you watching for? We got about 1 minute. We could talk about this for hours. But
coronavirus, opening up the state, right? All of those questions. I personally have been. I think that Governor Inslee has been like a beacon in this moment, and the way in which he has spoken back to 45 has been incredibly refreshing. But I think that there are really stark differences with these candidates that will be clear in our gubernatorial debate tonight.
I'm not sure. I mean, I'm still very much focused on coronavirus, and I have been impressed with Inslee's performance. I'm curious, of course, when the state is going to open up. I am always curious about in terms of law enforcement and policing in prisons here. I know that he has a number of clemency approvals on his desk that he has not signed. I'm wondering why that is the case from the clemency board. I think that the high approval ratings in Washington State in terms of how he has handled the coronavirus has provided him a bit of cover. But it's been interesting. I haven't really heard a lot from him around policing and prisons in Washington State. Right? We are a no parole state. So I would like to know a lot more about what is going on in terms of de-incarceration in the state.
And I think that, for a governor who really prides himself on being the environmental candidate, to connect that to issues of race and environmental racism, that's an opportunity for him. And again, as Megan said, I think we've heard very little around that.
Yeah. Well, I'm sorry that we had to cut the discussion on the governor's debate short, but had to get your thoughts in there. So thank you for that. And somehow that is already all the time that we have for tonight. I'd like to thank our guests so much for joining us. Megan Ming Francis, thank you. She's Associate Professor of Political Science at the University of Washington. And Relina Joseph, thank you so much. Professor of Communication and also Professor of American Ethnic Studies and Gender, Women, and Sexuality Studies at the University of Washington. Thank you both so much. And if you have not already, register for our next presidential debate preview. That's on Thursday, October 16th. KUOW's Ross Reynolds will moderate with special guests Crystal Hall, an Associate Professor of Public Policy and Governance at the University of Washington, and former U.S. Secretary of the Interior, Sally Jewell. Again, that's October 15th, Thursday. You can register for this event and our other election-related events at kuow.org/events. If you are watching on YouTube today, you can subscribe to our channel below. Please do that. And as a reminder, during this busy election news cycle, you can find new KUOW and NPR stories on the KUOW Newsroom podcast or on the NPR One app. Jump in whenever you're ready to listen, and you can skip whatever stories you want. You can find us right there. KUOW and NPR's presidential debate coverage continues. We will be airing both the vice presidential debate and the gubernatorial debate live this evening. You can join us on KUOW 94.9 FM or stream us live on KUOW.org. Thank you so much for being with us virtually this afternoon. I look forward to seeing you in person someday soon, hopefully, and thanks.